皆様お待たせいたしました。
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for waiting. We would like to resume the session. Session 1, Global Renewable Energy Expansion. We have with us Mr. Hugo Lucas, former Director, Knowledge Policy and Finance Center of International Renewable Energy Agency. And from China, Ms. Jen Dan, Specialist to Policy Research of Chinese Renewable Energy Industries Association, CREIA. Mr. Rainer Hinrichs Ralwis, President, European Renewable Energy Council, EREC. Mr. Klaus Rave, Chair, Global Wind Energy Council, GWEC. The moderator for the session is Ms. Mika Obayashi, Director of Japan Renewable Energy Foundation, JREF. Ms. Obayashi, floor is yours. Microphone, please. Please use the microphone. The interpreters cannot hear the voice. Please use the microphone. The interpreters cannot hear the sound. The interpreters cannot hear the sound. Oh, we can hear.
英語のなんか翻訳が入ってないっていうことなんですけど。
We can hear you. We can hear you. Thank you. Today we have 4 members of the panel in the session. We would like to start this session 1. First, overseas, how new renewable energies have been expanding. JREF yesterday hosted an experts meeting from Japan and abroad. We invited experts. It was a closed meeting we had yesterday. And the issues here in Japan or future directions of renewables were also discussed. And also from overseas, the participants, we listened to their wisdom. So first we would like to listen to what's happening at the overseas, and then I would like to share with you the situation here in Japan, followed by a discussion. I would like to keep to the allocated time of within 15 minutes. Mr. Hugo Lucas, floor is yours.
Hugo さんは、2月の10
Until February 26th, you were with the arena, and you have really been watching the worldwide trend.
Mika, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Japanese Renewable Energy Foundation for the invitation to speak in this forum. I think building in the brilliant presentation that we have before about the German case, I would like to continue the discussion on the energy transition and frame the energy transition in a more global context. For this, I would like to step back once and spend some time introducing this context. What we are now in an energy transition, or we are moving from a centralized fossil system to a more flexible renewable energy system, and why this is happening. Among many reasons, because the renewable energy resources, they are infinitive. Today, with renewable energy potential, we can supply more than 2,000 times the energy needs of today. Even if today we are using unconventional fossil resources, this will end someday, which will not be the case for renewable energy. And also, if we look into the technologies, renewable energy technologies, they are modular. You can have it in your calculator, you can have it in your watch, but also you can build multi-megawatt plants, and you can use it for the whole usage, the transport, the heating and cooling, or the electricity. And if we look how the technology has evolved, and we have here 2 photographs of a TV from 1972 or a phone from 1972 that my parents bought. And at that moment, you cannot pay it at once. I mean, you delay the payment in 24 months, you pay a little. And of course, this technology is already amortized. And for sure, I can plug this phone and it will work. And today, land calls are for free. So basically, I can call for free. I cannot put this phone in my pocket, but I can use it. Why do we don't see nuclear energy the same thing we see these technologies today? Why a nuclear energy plant from 1972 we think is reliable, is modern, is green, and is cheap? Why is only in the energy sector that we believe there is no progress? And I come here with a sentence from a former ministry of Saudi Arabia saying that the Stone Age didn't end for the lack of stone. And of course, the oil age will not end because of the lack of oil. And of course, this is beliefs. And in the rest of my presentation, I will present figures on this energy transition. We also saw figures from Germany. And also one more remark on why we are now in this energy transition. And I mean, in the summer of 1997, I spent my salary, my monthly salary, in a Kodak photo machine. If you tell me that day that in 2012 Kodak was going to be bankrupt, I will never believe it. But it's bankrupt because they didn't show digital cameras coming. And Kodak doesn't exist anymore. I mean, not in the photo market. And by the way, Japanese and Korean companies, they saw digital coming. Same thing for Nokia. I mean, their phones, they were not smart enough. Okay, so again, this will happen in the energy sector, and companies that don't follow this trend or listen to this trend or see this trend, and countries that will be soon out of the game. So as I say, those could have been beliefs or something, but I'm presenting cold figures now. I mean, in 2011, the new installed capacity, 44% was renewables, and in 2004, it was only 10%. So, I mean, people doing investment today, for the very first time, they are starting to think, okay, maybe the future is renewable energy. No? And as I say, and it's not anecdotal, you see how this trend is growing globally, global new installed capacity in power sector, without hydro, without big hydro. There's another interesting thing. I remember I started 14 years ago in the Spanish Renewable Energy Agency. And so we were traveling and discussing about the Spanish case, presenting the Spanish case. And at the moment, you see the statistics, and you see Germany, Denmark, and Spain leading the world renewable energy deployment. And I was always saying, this is bad news. What I want to hear in the list of countries leading renewable energy deployment is not Denmark, it's not Spain. I mean, we have our space, maybe the 12th, the 14th country, like any other sector of the economy. And this is happening today. Who is leading the renewable energy sector investment? There is the G20. Of course, you don't see Denmark in the picture anymore, of course, in global investment in new installed capacity in renewable energies, and you have the traditional players, and this is good news also for the energy transition, and good news for the renewable energy sector. And then you see at the very last, Spain, which is the right place, most probably, for the size of the economy, of course, I mean. And also, this is good news for renewable energy, because these countries have the sufficient size of the market to bring the cost down. And we have entered in a virtuous cycle. The more we install, the more we manufacture, the less costly we produce. And it's a virtuous cycle that is bringing very fast costs down. And if we see it now by regions, and then North America, it has a policy of a stop-and-go policy, so you have renewable energy increasing, but sometimes decreasing, depending on the policy. You have a very stable increase on investment in Europe over the years that only lately has decreased for two main reasons, because the cost of the unitary cost of the installed capacity has decreased, but also speed a little bit down the deployment of renewable energy. Asia with China, India, Japan, I mean, clear trends of increasing every year new investments in renewable energy. I will skip for the next slide, Middle East. And finally, the figures from Latin America, they are very much influenced by Brazil. Brazil is too big and it's hiding. Uruguay, in 3 years, Uruguay is going to go from 0 to 30% of electricity from wind, not subsidized, tendering, competing against gas, purely unsubsidized 30% electricity for wind. Same thing in the last tendering from Brazil. Chile, unsubsidized multi-megawatts PV in the Atacama Desert. All the mining company in Chile moving to PV. Peru wind. So these figures for Latin America, unfortunately, hide deployment. Brazil is hiding the deployment of other smaller countries, but very interesting emerging economy that they are betting and investing now in renewable energies for their future. Saudi Arabia. this is the Saudi Arabia plan for deploying renewables from 0 to 30% of renewable energy in electricity for 2030. All the Middle East countries, they are coming now with renewable energy plans, but that's not important. What it is important is that these countries are leading today the conventional sector, the fossil sector. But the sovereign fund of Saudi Arabia owns the main solar thermoelectric project in Morocco. The sovereign fund of Abu Dhabi owns the London Array in UK offshore project, owns the solar thermoelectric with storage, the first one running 24 hours in Spain. The sovereign fund of Qatar owns the main renewable energy company in Spain, Iberdrola. So these countries, they want to continue to lead the energy sector in the coming years and then investing in these companies and investing in this technology. Not only at home to save oil that they can sell abroad, very expensive, producing cheap electricity from solar mainly, but also being part of these companies worldwide. Few words. I will not go into the details. And we know that this massive deployment of renewable energy started thanks to supportive policies, and also we see how the maturity of the sector is also forcing policymakers to adapt their policies to the new context, to the introduction of the cost. We have seen integration into the electrical system, integration into the electricity market. We have seen a very good example of Germany before. Also, cities is another trend. Cities, they are not waiting for the central government, national-wide, to tell them what they have to do. They started to do their own renewable energy programs. And so two major trends, and one was already anticipated by the previous speaker. So now we are moving to the maturity of the renewable energy sector, so most of the countries now are looking into tendering schemes to set the efficient price of the electricity coming from renewables. And we have moved from 9 countries in 2009 using this system to 45, 30 of them in developing countries today. And the second trend has to be with the socket parity. Has to be that the cost has decreased so fast that now many people, they are paying more expensive the electricity in the socket from the distribution company that they can produce it in their own roof. So the round figures, it gives an idea of the amount of people in terms of capacity that they are paying more expensive their electricity today, or they were paying more expensive the electricity in 2012. These are figures from Bloomberg New Energy and Finance. And also, I want you to also take a look to the second, the darker line, the one in the bottom, which is the prediction on how this socket parity was going to evolve. This is the prediction from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and this is real life. So the prediction from Bloomberg New Energy and Finance in 2012 about the cost for PV in households, in 2013, it was already there. It is already a massive amount of people that can have cheaper electricity they produce it themselves. The problem is that the regulatory framework does not allow them to do it. And as I said before, we are entering a virtual cycle, so the most people install PV panels, the more we produce, the cheaper, and this cycle is feeding itself. And 2 more ideas. It was also very crystal clear and loud said by the previous speaker. This energy transition, this massive integration of variable electricity in the system is not causing any problem of reliability. So we are moving again from the system that we have today, the traditional system, where reliability is based in a strong base loss and overcapacity, an investment in overcapacity, to a system that is completely different, which the reliability means flexibility. It means integrating electricity with transport. It means forecasting of renewable energy. It means smart grids. It's a completely different concept, and we are moving into that. And you have here records, 64% peak demand, supply by wind in Spain, 42% supply in Germany, mainly PV, 122% because of the interconnection in Denmark. It doesn't matter the figures. I mean, the important thing is reliability with massive integration of variable electricity into the system is not a problem. The technology is there. Here are the solutions in terms of technology, in terms of approach. It's also true that there is also changing the electricity market, and as I mentioned also before by the previous speaker, of course, it's also decreased the price of the wholesale electricity market. And of course, once again, you need to have efficient measures to address this issue. And my very last idea is for this energy transition. I mean, there are new players. The game has completely changed, as I said before. If utility doesn't see it, that they have to move to provide kilowatt-hour to provide services, bad for them. But in this transition, people is the key. I mean, people has to be proactive and not reactive. If we want to have a PV panel in each roof, if we want to have electrical mobility, if we want to have in each hill a wind farm, social acceptance is not enough. We have to have public support. We have to invest in public awareness, and we have to give the possibility to communities and to people to actively participate in this transition, which, by the way, it also brings benefit to the society. 5.7 million people work today in renewable energy, and we have to increase education in renewable energy because one of the challenges is to provide to this market and to provide to this transition the qualified human skills needed. This is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hugo Lucas, thank you so much. The renewables have been enjoying a strong growth, supported by technological advancement. Now from China, Ms. Jen Dan, floor is yours. China is a driving country of the global wind and PV generation. Ms. Jen Dan, please.
Hello, everyone. It's been a great pleasure for me to be here and share with you some information about what's been happening to renewable energies in China. First of all, we can have a quick look at the rapid growth of renewables in China. As we can see from this chart, by the end of last year, which is 2013, China's renewable energy capacity reached 378 gigawatts, making up 30% of the country's total power capacity. And electricity generated by renewables was over 1 trillion kilowatt-hour, which is more than 20% of the total electricity output of the country. Regarding the primary energy consumption, renewables took up to 9.3% by last year. What is noteworthy, in the year before last year, which is 2012, wind overtook nuclear and became China's third largest energy source, right after coal fire and hydro. If we take a closer look into specific technologies, first of all, hydro has topped all the renewable power sources with total installed capacity of 280 gigawatts, 30 gigawatts added in last year, and almost 900 billion kilowatt-hour of electricity generated from hydro only last year. On the second place, we can see it comes to the wind power. Installed capacity reached 75.5 gigawatts, increasing 14 gigawatts in last year, and with a 140 billion kilowatt-hour generated. As for solar PV, installed capacity reached almost 15 gigawatts, was a 11.3 gigawatts new added in last year, and 8 billion kilowatt hour generated last year. Regarding biomass, there is 8.5 gigawatts installed and 32 billion kilowatt hour generated. You can see from this page. So from these figures, we can see some inspiring facts behind that. First of all, is the wind power. Wind power market indicates a recovery after a gloomy year from, from 2012. Yeah, 2012. In last year, the average turbine's operational period reached 2,080 hours in 2013, based on an increase of 151 hours on 2012, which is a new high since 2005. Although wind curtailment remains a challenge in China, but significant improvement can be seen from last year's figure. Secondly, last year was a record year for solar PV in China as well. The new feed-in tariff policy has been taken place, and new installed capacity reached 11.3 gigawatts last year. Thirdly, as for CSP, the solar thermal power, the first 10 megawatt pilot CSP plant was connected to the grid in Qinghai province. It's an important start in China. Behind those encouraging facts of renewables growth in China, the effective policy instruments have made great contribution. First of all, we have renewable energy surcharge. It is one of the key policies taking place in China. Consumers pay 1.5 yuan per kilowatt hour of renewable energy surcharge on their power sales. This money makes the main body of China Renewable Energy Development Fund, which goes to grid feed-in tariffs for solar PV and wind power. For wind power, we have feed-in tariff rates range from 0.51 to 0.61 yuan per kilowatt hour, classified by 4 types of different geographic areas with different resource levels. For solar PV, there are classified feed-in tariffs for utility, large-scale transmission PV plants as well. They are 0.9, 0.95, and 1 yuan per kilowatt hour based on solar radiation levels in different areas. For distributed rooftop projects, it's 0.42 yuan per kilowatt hour plus coal-fired power price, which is 0.2 to 0.36 yuan per kilowatt hour if surplus electricity feeds back to the grid. We can see from this chart, according to the distributed PV feed-in tariff, self-consumption is encouraged in comparison to feedback to the grid. After we are aware of what happened already, let's have a look into the future. According to China's policy schedule, the 5-year plan makes a key component as they are regarded as guidelines for government's investment priorities. Currently, it's the 12th 5-year plan, which covers the period from 2011 to 2015. In this plan, renewables are targeted to reach 33% of the country's total power capacity by the end of 2015. Yeah, including for hydro, it's 420 gigawatts. For wind, it's 100. For PV, 35. Biomass, 13. And 1 gigawatt for CSP. With such ambitious targets, we can expect continuous growth for renewables in China in the near future. Besides the industry-specific targets, China has set targets and goals for renewable energy integration projects as well. They are 100 new energy cities, 200 green energy counties, 30 new energy microgrid projects, and 18 distributed PV areas with demonstration projects. With these targets, we can see Chinese policymakers are trying to shift the focus from centralized renewable power supply to distributed user end. Yes? I think I can skip those specific information about the projects. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
ダンさんありがとうございました。大変その
Thank you very much. So we know that the renewables is growing in China. And so next I'd like to call upon Rainer Henriks-Lahr, President of the European Renewable Energy Council. And he's also the one of the directors of the German Renewable Energy Council as well.
Thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. What I'm trying to do is to give you an overview of where Europe is standing in the development of renewables, particularly in how far Europe is complying with the targets which it has set in unanimity, and where some policy changes are being discussed, where some challenges are to be met. Let me start with giving you a very, very short idea of what the organization is which I'm representing. This is EREC, the European Renewable Energy Council, which is the umbrella organization of all renewable energy technologies in Europe, including all the technologies, including all the sectors, which means electricity, heating and cooling, and transport. And of course, our main focus is to try and discuss and convince policymakers in Brussels and in the member states on how to develop suitable and stable frameworks for renewables. So let's start with the basic step forward, and sometimes it makes sense to look in the near future to see how to come there. You know, or you may know, that Europe as a whole is committed in various papers, in various declarations, to greenhouse gas reduction, to a sustainable energy supply, and of course also to economic growth and competitiveness, and that within this framework Europe is committed to changing the energy system overall to a more and more sustainable and clean energy supply. So it is maybe not surprising that when 2 years ago the European Commission presented an energy roadmap 2050, as they called it, when the result of this roadmap for Europe as a whole was that in all scenarios which they calculated, which I don't need to describe here in detail, but in all scenarios which met the decarbonization target, meaning Europe, like most of the industrialized countries in the world, by 2050 will have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 95%. So all the scenarios which meet these reduction targets include very high shares of renewable energies in the energy mix in Europe. What you see here, and these are the lines which are going up, you see in the overall energy supply, this includes electricity, heating and cooling, and transport, shares of renewables of at least 55%, up to even 75%. And to say it again, this is not our projection as a renewable energy industry. This is the projection of the European Commission. And if you look at the electricity sector, these shares look even higher. Then you see that the forecast for the share of renewables in Europe's electricity sector by 2050 will at least be close to 60%, if not more than 80%. And of course, I should add that from our perspective, we could certainly have a complete supply by renewables if policies were set right. But this is the midterm future. It's good to know that obviously politicians agree that this is desirable, that this should be done, but now it is about setting up policies. So where are we today? A picture which shows that we already have some impressive growth, at least in the power sector. What you see in this graph is on the bottom part, the blue elements are the new capacity of wind power starting in 2000 up to 2013. Then in green you see the new capacity of solar PV. And this all adds up, for instance, in the year 2013 to the figure of 72%, meaning 72% of Europe's new power capacity in 2013 was from renewables. And if you look at the slide, you see that a similar share, majority of new capacity in Europe coming from renewable energies, particularly wind and solar. That has been so for a couple of years already. And if you look at the part of the columns above the renewable sector, you see that that significant growth can only be seen in gas on the conventional side. This is the yellow parts. No significant new capacity in any other technology, be it coal, be it nuclear, be it anything else. So I think it is good and correct to say that in Europe, at least in the power sector, when it comes to new capacity, we are already in the age of renewables. And now, of course, the question is how to shape the path from this successful development now to an ever-increasing share of renewables, which comes close to the necessary figures which the European Union showed. Already today, renewables provide 13% of the overall energy supply in Europe. In the electricity sector, it's 23%, in heating and cooling, 15%, and in transport, this is the lowest part, below 5%. Another impressive figure, 1.2 million people are working in the renewable energy sector in Europe, and renewables are contributing more than 130 billion euros to the economic product of the European Union, which again is impressive. Now, you may be aware that Europe has, for the European Union as a whole and for the individual member states, binding targets for the time horizon 2020. What you see there, and it's not necessary that we go through all the figures, you see that these targets are differentiated between the member states, starting with the small island state of Malta with a target of 10% in 2020, and the highest share is the target of Sweden, which is 50% in 2020, depending on the resources in these countries and depending on the economic potential. And the European Commission has to follow up on target compliance, and a first analysis was already done, and industry associations like mine, we followed up on this, showing that in 2011, these are the last official figures which are available. We know that this trend more or less continued, but the last official figures were from 2012. We see that the European Union is on track, reaching the 2020 target, but of course this is differentiated among the member states. Some are lagging behind, many are successful. Let's look into this in a little bit more detail. You see the map of Europe, and you see where were we in renewables target reaching. In 2011, 21 of Europe's 27 member states were above their trajectory. So they had done more than they needed to do to reach their 2020 targets. But already there were 6 member states, and among them important ones like France, the United Kingdom, but also smaller ones like Luxembourg, Latvia, Netherlands, and Malta, who were lagging behind, who did not reach their indicative targets for these years. The European Union as a whole seems to be in line to reach the targets. If you look at the next slide, you see that indeed we have very different situations in most of the member states. Again, you see different percentages, and what is described here is the average annual growth rate which will be needed in the 27 member states of the European Union to reach the 20% target. There you see in the lower left part that Sweden with the 50% target is already there. So that was very successful. On the other hand, you see the United Kingdom. You may remember the country which is now planning for new nuclear. You see the United Kingdom, which would need to grow their renewables share by 16% every year to reach their target of 15% in 2020, meaning that they have a lot of work to do if they want to comply with their target. But obviously, policy development is not as fast as it should be there. And in between, you see in the middle, Europe as a whole needs something like 5% annual growth in renewables to reach the 20% target. To look at this in the different sectors, you see in the electricity sector, Europe is performing better than expected. In the heating and cooling sector, much worse than expected. There was even a negative growth in the last year. In the transport sector, worse than expected. And overall, as I said, some work needs to be done. I skipped the official comments of the European Commission, actually also saying with present policies alone it won't be done, but we can do it. Looking at 10 more years ahead, 2020 in the energy sector is tomorrow. Some even say it's yesterday due to the long investment cycles in the energy sector. This is why in Europe at present we are discussing targets or milestones for the time frame from 2020 to 2030. The European renewable energy industry, we have analyzed that ambitious targets for 2020 are necessary because we see, on the one hand, a global uptake of renewables in various countries. We heard the impressive figures of China. There are other countries, India, Brazil is doing well. Other countries in the world are also developing their renewables resources and their renewables policies. On the other hand, in Europe, we are discussing what needs to be done for 2030. So this policy uncertainty may be something like a barrier for smooth development, and this is why we think we should really do something very significant and ambitious. Why do we need new targets, ambitious targets for 2030? Of course, ambitious targets combined with related policies always provide a clear signal to investors so that investors know, does it make sense to set up manufacturing sites there? Does it make sense to engage in planning? This would grow the economy. This would reduce the costs of decarbonization because if a clear trajectory is there, if a clear target is there, other investment decisions which are not in line with renewables development would not be taken, bringing costs down. Of course, the more we develop renewables, the less we will need support mechanisms. We heard some technologies are already close to market prices or even below. So it's important to further develop it. It's important to develop industry. And of course, it's important to replace fossil fuels by renewables so that we are no longer dependent on energy imports. And this is why we think we need an integrated policy framework. I was told that I have to hurry up a bit, so I jumped through some slides, just give you a few more figures where we are today. These are 2012 figures where the renewables contributed about 137 billion euros to the economy in Europe, which is 1% of GDP, which could raise to 1.45% in 2030 with a good renewables policy framework and targets. Europe is spending every year something like 390 billion euros for fossil fuel imports. Of course, and at the same time, we have a trade deficit in Europe of 150 billion euros. We believe and we know it is possible to replace these imported fuels by domestic renewables. The value of around 350 billion euros could be replaced in 2030 by renewables, and this, of course, would save costs for consumers, costs for taxpayers. We could jump from the 1.2 million jobs we have today to 2.4 million jobs in 2020 and more than 4 million jobs in 2030, which certainly is not nothing, which certainly is quite important in the times of economic uncertainty. So, where we are now, we have started the official process. The European Commission has proposed for an integrated framework on climate and energy for 2030. What they have proposed, I put here on the slides. We believe that this is not very ambitious because they said they want 40% greenhouse gas reduction target for Europe, which is less ambitious than others believe is necessary, which is really disappointing. They say after the 20% target in 2020, they suggest only 27% in 2030. We believe that much more should be the target. Eric has suggested to go for more than 40%, for 45% in 2030. And we see that with these suggestions, we are afraid that less jobs will be created and less economic benefit will be there, and less fossil fuels will be saved by these low targets. So I said 27% renewables is not enough. We certainly need more in 2030 to really develop them. What to do to cure these deficits? We need an integrated framework. We certainly need carbon prices. I did not touch on this in detail, and I don't have the time for that now, but I think it's quite important to put the prices for fossil fuels right. It's very important to phase out subsidies for those energies we do no longer need, we do no longer want, and this certainly means to phase out subsidies for conventional and for nuclear energy. It certainly means to develop markets, and it means that support mechanisms are developed in a way learning from each other, developing good practice and completing the energy market. Finally, my conclusions. Europe is on the way to reaching the 2020 targets. Reliable policy framework will hopefully lead to really reach the target. And for 2030, we will need to develop infrastructure and policies and decide soon on ambitious and stable new targets and new framework. And with this, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reiner. And let us go on to the next speaker. We have Chairman from the Global Wind Energy Council, Mr. Klaus Rave. And he will be here speaking to us about the growing scale of the wind energy in the world.
Very much, dear colleagues from the Japanese Renewable Energy Foundation, for inviting me here. Allow me to take you on a short journey around the globe and give you an oversight and overview of the state of affairs of wind energy in the year 2013. This is the brief outline of my presentation. We are the global umbrella association that has as its membership all the most important industry players. We do have all the associations as members. I will show you on a slide later on. And it is our aim and our task to cooperate closely with those international institutions that have a mandate to deal with energy issues, like the IPCC, like the International Energy Agency, like IRENA and the IFFC. And we see that by talking to those international decision makers, we can inform those who may not be too close to the renewable energy markets about its achievements, and thereby help the membership, help the companies and associations on the national level, on the regional level, to achieve their goals and their business aims. So we communicate the benefits of wind energy to the governments, to the institutions, to the policymakers, and we collaborate with respect to research because there is still, and I need to underline this fact, there is still an awful lot of research to be done if we want to transform the energy system into a more sustainable future. So we comprise the important aspects of the renewable wind energy world as it is today. And as you can see here, it is not just turbine manufacturers, it is component manufacturers. And may I remind you that a wind turbine consists of about 8,000 components, 8,000 components. And there is a market, a niche market, a global market for many manufacturers here for small and medium-sized companies, not just only for the big players. And I think all this needs to be put together to further the cause of renewable energy installments. So this is the big and the beautiful picture of who are our members. It is, as I said, on the one hand, the big industry players. On the other hand, it is the associations like the Japanese Association, the Canadians, Indians, and so on and so forth. And we see those here at the conferences we organize. Just this week we start Mexico Wind Power, there is Brazil Wind Power, South Africa, China, India, Korea, amongst those important events where industry meets policymakers, where policymakers see what industry can achieve. These are the events I just been mentioning, and you're all invited to come and see what we have achieved over the last couple of years with respect to industries that do have an important effect on the local markets. We do publications, and we just released the 2013 figures, and I go into that in some detail just right now. We see the cumulative figures for 1996 to 2012 on the scale here, and you see that we ended up with 282,000 megawatts. So we had an average growth until 2012 of 18.8%, and the 16 years average growth of 27.7%, which is, I think, only be matched by the IT industry as far as growth rates go. In the year 2013, we've seen less growth because of the dramatic situation in the United States. I will come back to that in a short while. So you here see the annual installed capacity, and there again, an impressive figure for the 16-year average, and for the 2012 figure, it is somewhat less because of the aftermath of the financial crisis, the crisis in southern European countries as far as their budgets and their economy is concerned, and this has a direct effect on the figures for the global wind statistics. Just come back to that. In 2013, we saw, in comparison between the American markets of 12 and 13, a drop of over 12,000 megawatts, minus 12,000 megawatts in the United States because of the big battle that had been fought between Congress and Senate and the policymakers in Washington about the extension of the production tax credit. So here you see all those countries that do play an important part in the development of wind industry here, and you see that in the lead is China, and China again, followed in 12 by the US. In 13 it was Germany that came second place with more than 3,000 megawatts of newly installed capacity there. But what I'd like to outline here is that the range of countries has expanded over the last couple of years consistently and considerably. We now have more than 80 countries with wind activities globally, and more than 24 countries that have a higher installed capacity than 1,000 megawatts, which I regard as being the critical threshold for wind not only being marginal, but coming into the mainstream of energy policy. So this is the annual installed capacity at region by 24 to 2012. And you see that Asia is in the big lead here and will be in the big lead for years to come, with a strong driver of the Chinese market, as we have seen by the presentation of our friend from the Chinese Renewable Energy Industry Association. So this is the overall picture globally, onshore and offshore. If you just concentrate on the offshore market here, you see that it is still tiny in comparison to the global overall onshore market, and the activities there are restricted to, I would say, really 4 to 5 countries, with the United Kingdom in the lead here, and Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany following up, activities in China picking up too. Roughly, you could say that onshore is half as costly as offshore, although then again you would say that the offshore capacity is twice as much as the onshore. So the overall offshore market will pick up, but still we see changes in the technology here, and we see the impact of that on the overall market and its performance. We do the market forecasts, as I said, and you can see here what we see and what we envisage in the years 2013 and 2017 to happen, cumulative as well as installed capacity as per year is concerned. And this is steady growth you see here, and I think this is the most remarkable sign that you can see. Global cumulative wind power capacity in our scenarios will go up to over 1,000 gigawatt by the end of this decade. And for those who can't believe those figures, I can assure you that whatever scenario we've been coming forward with as far as onshore wind is concerned, every single one of those scenarios was met before time and was met with more and more ambitious targets that we've seen in terms of installations. So the share of global electricity consumption with respect to wind energy, electricity generated by wind turbines, will be, roughly speaking, by the end of the century in the region of 12%. And we need this because of the climate imperative. Wind energy is the fastest source that has been installed next to solar PV, and we see that it is the main driver in a positive way to mitigate climate change, and this is what we need to do in order to still have a chance to come forward with the 2% goal, and what we can possibly do to lobby with respect to the Paris meeting that will be decisive for the future of our planet with respect to climate change. We will try and do and talk to the policymakers, not just about reducing something, but by installing and thereby stimulating growth in favor of their respective populations. The new markets we see here, and Hugo has mentioned some of those already, we see in Latin America, and it is not just Mexico and Brazil, it is the smaller countries there as well, but as far as the impact goes, it is Mexico and Brazil competing who is the leader as far as Latin America goes. We see hopeful signs in Southern Africa, South Africa and the East African corridor for clean energy, and we see new countries there like Mongolia that have an abundant resource of wind energy and a very high and exciting growth rate. So I think all those countries there do have excellent conditions for new installments if, and this is the big if a grid could be built there. Looking ahead, I'd say 2013 was the tough year as expected, with the US really being down, but hopeful signs is that the bumpy road lies behind us, and we will see new record figures in 2014 and 15. There's a good perspective for both China and India, and although Europe has been sluggish in terms of growth over the last couple of years, as Rainer just mentioned, still it is a haven of stability with respect to political frameworks. And in Latin America, we see more and more of the smaller states, like Uruguay, like Chile, and like the Middle American states that will pick up, and Africa has a good perspective ahead. What we see is rates of global growth will slow unless, and I need to highlight this, the gap that is left by the OECD countries is filled by new market players in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. that there will be a recovery of the economies of the OECD countries, and by whatever means we will see new CO2-related legislation or effects taking place that stimulate the markets. The downward price pressure continues because of the overcapacity that is there. The fracking does not help either. And we see consolidation in the manufacturing business for a few years more to come. We will fight for a global climate agreement, but there's still too much uncertainty in the international political landscape and the future carbon markets. And as far as funding is concerned, climate-related funds. So in the meantime, we need to focus on national, regional legislators and their markets and try to bring our message across and hope that the market players will still be in place. So let me conclude in saying what this story is all about. The 21st century will be clearly the century and the age of renewables, and it is the age of electricity, and wind will be a driving force of that change. And three messages to finally conclude is we need to tell people stop burning and start earning, because it is pathetic that whilst there is an alternative to generate electricity, we still burn. We burn finite resources at shorthand and therefore really kind of deal and hamper with future generations. The second is there is no transition into a new energy system without transmission. The transmission system is and need to be the focus of policymakers to ensure new international cooperation, new cooperation for new renewable sources. And thirdly and lastly, for all those who think electricity is a thing of the past, there is no communication without electrification, no internet, no big data, no nothing if the electricity network does not work. Thank you very much for your attention.
大変ありがとうございます。これから
Thank you so much. We would like to now start a discussion, but before that, allow me to introduce the who are here. Mr. Hideki Makihara, the Parliamentary Vice Minister of the Environment, Lower House Member. Mr. Makihara, thank you. Former Environment Minister and former the MHLW the Senior Vice Minister, Mr. Nagahama. Again, thank you so much. So allow me to share with you the current situation here in Japan. So I'd like to share with you the overview to kickstart the panel discussion. Allow me to be seated. First of all, this is METI's information translated into English. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with this chart. Last November, by the end of November, how renewables were introduced. It's been disclosed. You can see FIT, feed-in tariff. Since the July 2012, it has been introduced. You can see that this is 6,453 megawatts, 6.5 million kilowatt hours. Renewables are now incorporated, but as you can see, most of them are PV, photovoltaic, wind power, and small and medium-scale hydro, bioenergy, geothermal are not really significant. On the other hand, if you look at the capacity of certified facilities in this FIT, those that have been certified by the government, this is close to 28,000 megawatts. As you have heard probably in the mass media, not all of them has been incorporated, but even if it's one half, it will be 13 million or 15 million. So it's again significant. But again, most of them are photovoltaic. Then let us look into the PV, photovoltaic. This is the according to the PV Association. Domestic Japanese manufacturers' shipment volume. It's shown Until 2011 fiscal year, export was significant. The blue represents export. However, well, perhaps because of FIT, domestic Japan's commercial PV generation, which is represented in yellow, and also for residential, the orange part. Again, manufactured shipment enjoyed significant increase. So relatively speaking, exports declined. So domestic demand improved. This is the overall forecast. If you look at the edge, 2012, left-hand side, if you look at the 2030, then you can see the significant increase by 2030. Regarding the slides that we are sharing with you, almost instantaneously, immediately it will be available on the web, so you can look at them on the website. And regarding this international conference, this is actually on the webcast for the entire globe, so you can enjoy them later. PV generation is likely to enjoy a huge increase in 2030. 100 gigawatt is the projected, and that's the ambition by the PV Association. Now, wind power generation under the FIT does not enjoy much growth, but little by little it has been increasing. But I would like to draw your attention to the following: the red part, the annual introduction. After the FIT in 2012 and 2013, the incorporated volume actually decreased, especially concerning 2013. From 2001, it has been, in 2013, it's the lowest growth rate. Because of FIT, for wind power generation, there were the subsidies for installment suspended, and because of the policy gap, as some people say, but still, the growth of wind power generation is so slow here, and compared with what we had from overseas for colleagues, perhaps they should enjoy a little higher growth. Now, according to the Association on Wind Power Generation, this is forecast until 2050. Again, 50 gigawatt by 2050. 2030, 100 gigawatt was the PV. So even after 50 years, this is about half of that in terms of the capacity. Power generation is not really enjoying much growth, and the Wind Power Generation Association is looking into that. I think Klaus mentioned it by 2020 globally. 2,000 gigawatts, that was the figure shown by you, Klaus. So 2 billion kilowatts, I would say. Then we should enjoy a little higher growth. Perhaps there's some contribution that Japan can make. So Germany is a country where the renewables enjoy much advancement. I'm sorry that it's all in English. Policy evaluation is given here. On top, you can see the unbundling. It has been done in Germany, not yet in Japan. Next, regulate TSOs for expanding grid, again available in Germany, not in Japan. Next, renewables should enjoy priority access, which is available in Germany. In Japan, it's stipulated in law, but exemptions are allowed, and quite often it seems that the exemptions are allowed, so there all check and triangle. Then priority dispatch of renewables. Priority dispatch, again, in Germany, yes, the top priority is given to renewables, but in Japan it's the second or the third. So as you can see from the slide concerning renewables, the preparation to drive the growth of renewables, that is not sufficient. And you can see that this is data from Sankei B's, US, France, and Germany's heavy industries, and Japan's representative 3 heavy industries are shown: GE, Siemens, Alstom. Again, they have a significant share of renewables, but MHI, Hitachi, Toshiba, they are not that conspicuous. And this is from today's top page of Nikkei newspaper. GE has decided to re-enter the Japanese market for wind power generation. It looks like they are taking into consideration FIT, but in Japan, we have a great Mitsubishi's wind power generation technology So by developing the Japanese domestic market, Japan's wind power generation industry could actually enjoy more growth. On these things, I would like to have your inputs in the following discussion. There are 5 of us, and I have just shared with you the overview. First of all, I would like to pass the baton to Mr. Hugo Lucas. Any comments?
Comment on there.
Well, thank you very much, Mika. I think that I fully agree with your analysis. And as I mentioned, the good news about the global investment figures, global in terms of all the countries and also all the technologies, is that you have the big countries in the picture. You have China, you have Germany, you have US, and you have Japan in the 4th place for all the technologies. But when you look into the picture for wind, Japan is out of the picture. No? So it's clear there is a low-hanging fruit that is not being tapped, or there is not being developed the right way. And I mean, large-scale deployment of wind, as we saw in the presentation from Klaus, is happening all over the world. It's happening in South Africa, it's happening in Uruguay. I mean, it's clearly a problem about the regulation in Japan. It's clearly, I mean, and it's a low-hanging fruit. They can produce very cheap electricity. And the second comment is the second low-hanging fruit, and is okay. That you have already set a very successful rooftop program for PV, but as I mentioned before, technologies are evolving, so you have to think how to adapt this. Set clear long-term targets, but also an adaptation of the policy to decrease the cost in time to avoid past mistakes from other countries. Thank you very much.
So as was explained, so learning from other countries, the mistakes from other countries. What example can you give? Any specific examples of mistakes of some countries?
You must learn there.
Yeah. In particular, I was thinking in the rooftop program, rooftop feed-in tariff. Now, we saw yesterday all the symptoms of a bubble when you are massively installing PV, but the cost is so high and the final price is high because there is expectation all the value chains to make money. And this is because there is not included integration rate. So to benefit from the learning curve of this technology, for benefiting from the reduction of the cost of this technology, you have already to incorporate, to adapt your feed-in tariff and incorporate a regression rate. And on the other hand, you also have to set long-term signal, which is not the case if I were understood in 4 years. There is uncertainty of what is going to happen in 4 years, but establishing a long-term goal from here to 2013, for instance, but making very clear how much capacity you want to install every year, or not only every year, every 3 months, how much install capacity you will allow of this technology, but also how much you are going to pay in terms of including this regression rate. So the more you install, the less you pay. I mean, those are the lessons learned from a sustainable deployment of the rooftop PV market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe we should ask Jendan-san to hear about the situation in China, because for renewable energy you have national policies and you're showing that there's large growth. And anything in particular that you can add? Any impressions of the presentations that you've heard of? Any proposals, please?
Okay, thank you. According to Mr. Lucas just mentioned, like maybe it might not be mistakes that China has made, but there are a lot of lessons learned through like several years of growth, including wind and solar, which I would like to briefly introduce to Japan, so that maybe you can avoid some difficulties or challenges in the future. Let's take wind in China. Actually, solar are facing the similar challenge now as well. For China, the majority of power consumption is centered in the east coastal areas. But for wind, most of the wind and solar plants are centered in the west area, which has the richest resources, but a lack of energy consumption and has really limited transmission network as well. Now there are like huge gap between the supply and consumption, which caused wind curtailment challenge to China, especially it appears very severe from 2011 to 2012. And to resolve this problem, China has taken two ways in action. One is to encourage the distributed projects, like take take solar PV as an example. Like China has planned like 14 gigawatt of PV new added capacity for the new year 2014, and 60% of this target is the rooftop distributed PV projects. And this, just as I mentioned in my presentation, this shift of policymakers' focus has shown the determination of the choice of distributed pattern of deployment in PV sector in the future. As the second matter, like China has taken great steps in transmission system and networks construction by state grid. Like in last year, our state grid company invested around 318 billion yuan in transmission network construction, which bridge the east to the west, so that we can transmit the power generated from the renewable energy plants to the consumption area. It indicates a 20% increase in this new year, in 2014, of the investment in this transmission network. Maybe you are not very clear about what normally happened to state grids. As since 2009, the investment growth rate of state grid was normally no more than 4%. Yearly it's 1 to 4%. So this 20% really exceeded the expectation. So those two are the means or measures China are taking to overcome these difficulties. But I think for Japan, especially for the solar PV sector, Japan can avoid this kind of difficulties, and to avoid the waste of resources, China has invested a lot of money in and have to take this challenge. So this is my opinion. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you. Mr. Leiner? Oh, Leiner, please. Any comments?
Yes, I try. I think from what I heard from your short presentation about Japan today and what I learned in the expert workshop yesterday, I think my basic impression on the difference between the success stories we heard about and the development in Japan basically boils down to two major points. The one is quite obviously, and the symptom for me is quite clear, the development of very low development of wind and strong development of PV, which is unique in comparison to other countries in the world where the low-hanging fruit wind was harvested much stronger. In Japan, it seems that the lack of a clear policy decision to gradually or quickly, but at least to replace the old system, which is based on dirty coal and dangerous nuclear, to replace it by clean and sustainable renewables. This policy decision has not yet been taken, quite obviously, but from what I hear with these figures, planning high shares of PV to be continued and low shares of wind to be continued as well. This seems to be the necessary decision, either to continue a system which relies on unflexible power plants like coal and nuclear, or to go for a flexible system which relies on renewables, particularly wind and solar, has not yet been taken. And we heard this morning in the keynote presentation that quite obviously we risk to, a country risks to try and double pay the same target. So if you do not take clear decisions, you risk to pay too high prices. A major second part, which obviously has not yet been decided here, which would facilitate growth of renewables, grid access of renewables, priority dispatch of renewables, is the question of which role, which legal status does the grid operator, particularly the transmission system operator, have. Quite obviously, a transmission system operator which is owned by the power companies, which also run the conventional power plants, economically speaking and logically speaking, does not have an interest to allow high shares of renewables in the grid, because this is competition to their own power plants. So the question of separating legally, or even better, ownership-wise, separating production of energy from distribution of energy, in Europe we call that unbundling, would be a necessary, at least a very useful asset to facilitate stronger growth of renewables, particularly wind and solar. And I think these two things, taking the decision, do you really want to replace old system by a new and flexible one, and really facilitate grid integration, grid access of renewables. This will certainly bring the costs down and grow the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. In the afternoon, we'll be talking more about unbundling. How do we arrive at a system where there is a distributed energy system? That will be the crux of the afternoon session. And concerning the law, the Japanese law, and it has been decided that there will be legal unbundling, not just operational unbundling. And then, of course, we are lobbying for that. And Klaus, perhaps? Would you have any recommendations, comments, questions, etc.?
May I just go back about 40 years? That was the aftermath of the first oil price crisis, where we were globally for the first time debating the limits of growth. And that was about the time when the Japanese economy was the most successful one in the first time in the history. There was a decoupling of economic growth and the consumption of energy. That was done in Japan 40 years ago. So I think you should go back and look into this successful history and how could this happen? This happened because there was a consensus in the Japanese industry that the dependence on imports was endangering the success of the Japanese competitiveness in terms of export industry and being export driven. So this success, I think, you need to bear in mind when you compare the situation to what we find now 3 years after 3/11. Nothing in the style of we make a fresh start in Japan and take the lead as far as international competitiveness is concerned is happening. Because, and there's one simple reason there are so many vested interests in the Japanese energy sector that stop this from happening, and there has no consensus being built yet. The market is not a good master, but a good servant. That's what I once wrote read in The Economist. And I think this you need to bear in mind if you want to restart or kickstart the Japanese energy industry all over again. Because we need new players in this market, and the market that is efficient and sustainable for the future will comprise of actors like energy producers, those who sell and trade and deal with energy, particularly electricity, those who transmit the electricity to the end customers. But this is a different setup of market players than we see now, where we have utilities as monopolies that are closely linked to state authorities. There is no competition there, and therefore nothing changes. When nothing changes, you will stagnate, and stagnation is not to the benefit of the Japanese people and the Japanese economy with respect to its future export orientation and its success. So what's being called for is not only new regulation, but a better form of good governance, following up that regulation, and to take into account the best practice examples that you can see, because we share this experience with you here today of all those who have been successful. And you need not, as Zheng Dan just said, repeat the mistakes others have been making, but you can outsmart them and take the lead again, as the Japanese economy and the Japanese electricity sector and energy sector did 40 years ago. This is just one generation, but I do not want to see this generation being lost. There should be a new impetus for the Japanese energy sector there. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。ちょっと
Thank you. Maybe we can go to a slide.
これは
And this, Amory Robbins produced this chart, and in last year in the Revision International Conference, or the RE Vision Conference, he indicated this slide. And as you see in this slide, we are moving towards a distributed system. And this is the map of Denmark, indicating 85 on the left-hand side, and you see that there was centralized coal-fired power plants around Denmark, but there was the effort to set up many wind farms and also CHPs in the many towns and cities of Denmark. So Denmark has already moved to such a map. So 100%, well, on some days, 100% of the electricity consumption is generated by wind. So I think we have to discuss in the afternoon too how we're going to move in that direction. And I think we have received various comments, and there are some issues that we've been discussing in Japan too. One of them is the numerical targets. Right now, amongst the policies, we are trying to come up with numerical the targets. And so today, in the morning newspaper, it was indicated some numerical targets, and also that there'll be discussion between the government, i.e. the bureaucracy, and the cabinet as to the basic plan for energy. And so and also we have carried out some surveys with the PV companies. And so I think as a policy, the government should come out with a clear-cut target concerning solar, the utilization of solar. And also, in order to further promote RE, it is essential that the government come out with a policy framework that is stable.
So that's one thing that I want to mention. And one other thing that was mentioned earlier, there needs to be some political leadership. And Mr. Hendricks has also mentioned that that might be something that's lacking in Japan in order for us to be able to promote these energy business. So perhaps we could have very short comments on those points. Would someone care to start?
to make comments?
ターゲットを設定するというのは今おっしゃったようにまず進歩するために最も重要なものであります。
About the Danish energy policy, because it is the only energy policy I know of globally that has seen a consensus between the major political parties and the setting of targets in Parliament and between Parliament and government and those concerned in the energy industry sector, that is formerly the utilities, then nationalizing the grid operations in Denmark and talking actively to all those who play an active part in the energy sector. So get all those together, not just the government people, but the business people and civil society as well. Because there's one thing that we have not discussed yet, which I think is needed as well. If you want to have better planning practices, you need better participation of those who are some way or the other affected by those planning, either a new wind farm, a new overhead power line, and so on and so forth. And the better you have organized this participation, the quicker you achieve your goals and your targets. And the best participation is not only the one that is kind of a formal procedure, but the best participation is one that counts, and counts money-wise, that is, make people involved as investors into decentralized, for instance, wind power or solar power. If they do invest, they like their investment to be successful. In order to be successful, this investment has to be built rapidly. And this has been a big success both in Denmark as well as in the north of Germany, where I do come from. And then, and this is my third point here, then you can establish a track record of renewable energy investment that is attractive for pension funds, is attractive for all those who do not know where to put their money, because for the time being, considering the state of affairs of the financial markets, renewable energy investment, grid investment is one of the safest investments you can go for, if you can convince those investors that there is a proven track record. And to give you just one last example of where I come from, we've seen wind farms operating for 20, 25 years already. So we have a proven track record of the turnout of each individual wind farm there. And the new investment now, when we start to talk about repowering, this new investment is being done on a cash base only, as a project finance, pure and simple, with no equity being asked for, because you know the performance of the wind farm, and therefore you can invite people and say, this is the best investment for your own future, for your children, and for your grandchildren as well.
Okay, so I think numerical targets are indeed important as a first step, because they give an idea of what level of ambition there is. But a numerical target which is either too low or setting the wrong priorities, technologically speaking and politically speaking, is not really very useful. So such a target, first step, involvement of the public in a way, indeed, not just to tell them what utilities and government believe, but to really be transparent, explain what is possible, what is not, have a discussion, what kind of infrastructure do you need, what kind of power mix do you want, and then again, it comes to what I already said in my last intervention, such a target must be based on an unambiguous decision where to go in the future energy mix, and definitely a decision to have everything at the same time. Having renewables and inflexible old system. This is certainly not a useful target. So whatever figures of renewables you decide at this, and at the next moment telling the people, but there may be too high shares and the grid is unstable. So this will not really help. So we need transparency, we need a clear signal in which direction to move, and I can only insist this direction has to be based on renewables, flexible, and of course improving infrastructure, improving public participation, and improving policy decision process. Based on this, certainly policy instruments which help to achieve a target which I described as realistic, unambiguous, and really showing where to go, involving the public. This is certainly necessary. Without these instruments, again, you will not reach the target. So I think this is where many countries in the world successfully went, and where I would recommend Japan as well to go, because this would just avoid unnecessary public spending for old technologies which are no longer necessary, for infrastructure which is not adapted to the new system which is needed, which is based on wind and solar. Thank you.
ジェンダンさん、どうぞ。
Yes, thank you. I fully agree with what Mr. Rave and Rainer said. Actually, China is really good at making targets and plans. We did it like every 5 years, and within every 5 years, we modified it several times. So it turns out that like many of the targets has been realized, but there are some which we didn't achieve the goal, like turns out. From the lessons we learned, I think there are two things which already mentioned by Mr. Rave and Rainer. The first is to have the investors and players, key players in the market, more intensively involved in the planning making procedure, which will give the government a more clear concept of what the markets are needed and what the market needs are, and the demand of the industry development. And the second is to achieve the target, or to achieve the strategic plan goal. There needs some supportive policy instrument and tools, like what happened in China, what happened in Japan now. First, to open the gate to the international players, which can help reduce the cost of renewables in Japan itself. And you can use like rules and standards to regulate the market to avoid chaos, but like you really need some fresh blood from overseas. And the second is like to make renewable energy more competitive in Japan. On the other hand, maybe you need to consider to use some policy instrument to raise the cost of conservative energy consumption. Like there can be standards upgrade for power which are polluting and unsafe, so that it will make renewable energies more competitive in the market. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。で、最後、なんかちょうど順番になってきたんですけれども。
So I guess we are just in order, but if Hugo, if you'd like to conclude.
Thank you very much. Basically, to summarize, because I fully agree with my colleagues, I mean, from the energy transition in this changing of the energy paradigm is not sufficient to have ambitious but realistic targets. It has to be a holistic approach. It has to take into consideration technology, and renewable energy technologies are there. But it's not only electricity, it's also transport, heating and cooling. It has to take into consideration money, of course, is the second pillar, and for this you have to set the enable environment for investors to feel comfortable. And the third pillar is people, and you have also to work in public awareness, education and training. So thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you. Now we would like to wrap up this session 1. As I said before, the Energy Basic Plan is to be discussed today. the positioning of the renewables, promising energy, that's how they describe it, as I heard. It's something to happen in the future. But as you already heard, renewables are already pretty powerful, and they are making a contribution and supplying energy in various countries. In Japan, in the industry sector, we would like to see it revitalized. And concerning the renewables, I think it needs to be developed further. About the JREF recommendation to the Energy Basic Plan, that the booklet is available for distribution at the outside. I would like to encourage you to take a look at them. And with this, we would like to conclude session 1 and followed by a lunch break. Thank you so much for your kind attention. All the speakers and Ms. Obayashi, moderator, thank you so much. Join me in thanking them with a round of applause. Now we would like to have a lunch break. Basement 1 and also the first floor, there are many restaurants. Please enjoy lunch, and you are kindly requested to be back by 2 o'clock. We are planning to resume this next session at 2 o'clock. Make sure you have all your belongings with you. Drinking and eating in the hall is prohibited. Lobby or foyer or in such designated places, please enjoy your food. Mr. Masayoshi Son's the video message transcript is available at the outside, who is the founder of our foundation. In the lobby, JREF Iwanami booklet, in renewables Q&As available for sale. Again, I would like to encourage you to buy this booklet. Regarding today's presentation materials, later it will be available on our web page. And today's symposium, within this today, it will be uploaded on the Ustream. It will be available for viewing starting tomorrow. You are also kindly requested to turn in the questionnaire sheet to the staff. And we would like to collect the receivers for simultaneous interpretation at the exit. Make sure you don't take them out of the hall. With this, we would like to conclude the morning session. We'll resume the session 2 at 2 p.m. Thank you.